Hello and welcome to the qualifying edition of the race weekend's data analysis for the French Grand Prix. Now, annoyingly, this was the very first qualifying session of the year that I have missed due to me now working Friday, Saturday and Sunday, so these videos will be slightly later than usual. I'm hoping to get this out on Saturday evening, if not, it will be Sunday morning before the Grand Prix. We also had 47 individual prediction entries as well, which is absolutely mega. So without further ado, we will jump on into the qualifying data of today's video. And we begin with those prediction results post-qualifying. And it is once again Evan Darcy leading the way, scoring his bonus statement as well as having an exceptional top 5 in qualifying, joint with 11 with Gemma Gibson and also Ritteraj on 10 having a good turnaround. And then we have a bunch of people joint on 8. We have Callum, we have Het, we have Joe Bisher, we have Joshua, we have Min Verstappen as well, and we have a new entrant, White River. Then we've got myself and Elian on 7 points, and a Doctor Who channel on 6 as well. And there are also a bunch of people on 6, from a Doctor Who channel all the way down to Scott Hilland and Vim Z25. And then just taking a look at the second half of the leaderboard of the 47 individual entries, we have people like Jif A, Kit BM as well, Pablo is up there, Cosmos, and then Kevin and Ricardo Quota at the bottom. But there is still a lot to play for in this predictions championship, as we have a bunch of people's bonus statements still applying to the race, and obviously the top 5 for the race still to look out for. If you want to get involved with this audience prediction championships, then make sure to catch my video released on Thursday ahead of the Grand Prix weekend. But with all of that out of the way, let us remind ourselves of what happened in today's qualifying session. But like I said, I didn't actually watch it, the very first one that I have missed. So on screen now is the Q1 leaderboards. It is topped by Max Verstappen with an alternating quartet of the Red Bulls and the Mercedes. But Mick Schumacher and also Yuki Tsunoda had crashes, with Mick Schumacher actually getting in to Q2, but ultimately crashing at the end, which did significantly hamper Lance Stroll. As you can see, he set a 2-minute 12 lap time. That was his only lap time, and unfortunately the session was red flagged and he was biffed out. However, heading into Q2, it was Mercedes' turn to take the top of the timing sheets, with the Red Bulls just behind, with interestingly Perez ahead of Verstappen and Bottas ahead of Hamilton this time. And then getting through to Q3 once again is Pierre Gasly in P6, with Sainz still ahead of Leclerc, Norris ahead of Ricciardo, and Alonso squeezing in to the top 10 for the French Alpine team, with Ocon just out, unfortunately, along with Sebastian Vettel, Giovinazzi, Russell and Schumacher, who didn't set a time. And then we take a look at Q3, and it is Max Verstappen, the only driver this weekend to set a lap time sub 1 minute 30, a 1:29.990, 2.5 tenths faster than Lewis Hamilton. That is quite a significant margin. Sergio Perez lines up P4 and Gasly splits the two Ferraris, with Carlos Sainz out-qualifying Charles Leclerc in all 3 of the qualifying sessions. And then it's Alonso in the Alpine who splits the McLarens, with Norris ahead of Ricciardo. But now plotting all of these lap times onto a graph from each of the 3 sessions so we can visualize the driver progression, it looks a little bit like this. And interestingly, there is a nice progression. There is no sort of plateau from one session to the other. There is no big decrease like we've seen at some other points in the season. Then equally taking each team's fastest lap time from each of the sessions and then working out the difference between them, we can calculate the most improved team from Q1 to Q2. And that is actually Williams at the bottom. They gained almost a second. This is massively against their trend so far. Normally when George Russell gets into Q2, it is with a mega Q1 lap, and then his Q2 lap just isn't anywhere as good, whereas this time it was almost the reverse. The Q1 was just enough to get through into Q2, and then his Q2 lap was absolutely mega. Equally, Alfa Romeo and Ferrari gained just over 9 tenths as well. And then doing exactly the same for Q2 to Q3, it is Red Bull who gain almost a second. That just shows how good of a lap that was from Max Verstappen in Q3. Mercedes and AlphaTauri gained half a second, then Ferrari and McLaren gained 3 tenths, and Alpine 2. But now what we're going to do is we're going to break down each of the teammates and see exactly how well they performed against each other in the French Grand Prix qualifying session. We're going in 2020 championship order, so we start with Mercedes. They're all time-stamped down in the description below, so you can skip to whichever team you would like me to talk about. But we do start with Mercedes here, and we can interestingly see that Bottas was only faster in Q2. He actually had a very big gain from Q1 to Q2, and then just not quite as much from Q2 to Q3. But if we actually take a look at the Mercedes positions on the left, with Bottas in the turquoise and Hamilton in the black lines, they are all over the place. They have not been consistent qualifiers whatsoever this season. With, interestingly, the gaps in the top right for the French Grand Prix being all lower than the average gaps so far across the first 6 races. And then from Mercedes we take a look at Red Bull, where they almost have a sort of inverse trend of what we saw. Verstappen, he actually lost time going from Q1 to Q2, so his Q2 time was actually an outlier. He was always going to be on this trajectory to be about half a second quicker than Sergio Perez in each of the sessions, so we could have always predicted that he could have gone this quickly had he actually set a sensible Q2 time. But so far this season, it is Max Verstappen who has been the most consistent qualifier. If we take a look at his Q3 positions graph all the way in the bottom left, he has just been as low as P3. And then in the head-to-head, it is currently 6-1 in favour of Max Verstappen, with the qualifying gaps in the top right graph being 5.5 tenths in Q1, which is about 2 tenths faster than the season's average so far, whereas his Q3 advantage over Sergio Perez was 4.5 tenths in Q3, which is about a tenth and a bit down on the Q3 average so far. Whereas Sergio Perez being a tenth up in Q2 is about half a tenth down on his average ahead of Max Verstappen so far in Q2. And then from Red Bull, we take a look at McLaren, the papaya team, and it is once again Lando Norris who just dominates Daniel Ricciardo. But it was, however, a much better session from Daniel Ricciardo. And interestingly, Lando Norris has had a 7-0 head-to-head in Q2. Not that Q2 really matters too much, but it's interesting that it is 7-0. But other than that, there really isn't too much else to interpret at all from the McLaren data from qualifying. So from the papaya team of McLaren, we now take a look at Aston Martin. And honestly, I think this was a touch on the disappointing side. So forget the fact that Lance Stroll did have some bad luck with the red flags in Q2, and not setting anywhere near a competitive lap time whatsoever in qualifying. Sebastian Vettel didn't manage to make it through to Q3. After his recent performances so far in the past few races, I was expecting him to get into Q3, and unfortunately, it just didn't happen. However, the head-to-heads are looking in Sebastian Vettel's favour. They are 4-3 in Q1 and in Q2, and then 2-all in Q3. And so from Aston Martin and a little bit of a disappointment to Alpine, and a much better qualifying session from Alpine. Yes, both cars did not make it through to Q3. They were very close. Ocon down in P11 and Alonso making it through. But they do have exceptional pace, and I do think that they can actually try and mix it with the McLarens and try and possibly get ahead of Pierre Gasly, who is having the season of his life in that AlphaTauri. We thought that last year, but he is really driving exceptionally well. But anyway, we're here to talk about Alpine. And there was just a 200th of a second difference between the two drivers in Ocon's favour actually in Q1, and then unfortunately in Q2 that gap rose to about 2 tenths, Alonso finding just that little bit extra over his Frenchman Esteban Ocon. I realise over his Frenchman doesn't really make much sense, over his French teammate Esteban Ocon. Then from Alpine we take a look at the Scarlet Ferrari team, and for the first time it is Carlos Sainz who dominates Charles Leclerc in every single one of the sessions, and for the first time this season he is out-qualified Leclerc. I've also changed up the colours, so Carlos Sainz is now in the black and Charles Leclerc is in the Ferrari red, as some people were getting a little bit confused in the comments below saying that they were a little bit too similar when Charles Leclerc was a darker red and Charles Leclerc was the normal Ferrari red. But Sainz actually put in a storming Q2 run. Normally, he was about 1.5 tenths faster in Q1 and in Q3 over Charles Leclerc, but in Q2, it was 4 tenths. And we can see from the consistency of the improvements of Leclerc from Q1 to Q2, then Q2 to Q3, that it was a truly exceptional lap from Sainz in Q2. But from Ferrari, we now take a look at Alfa Tauri. And once again, like I said in the Alpine piece, Pierre Gasly is just having an exceptional season, unlike his teammate Yuki Tsunoda. Unfortunately, it was yet another crash for Yuki Tsunoda. I really would have expected just a little bit more consistency and a little bit more from Yuki Tsunoda at this stage in the season. Granted, it is his first season, like I have said in the past couple of these types of videos, but I do expect just a little bit more at this stage in his career. We're up to round number 7 at the moment, and he is still making rookie mistakes. I will give him until the second half, or until the summer break, of this season, but I do think he needs to sort of buckle up his ideas just a squidge. So unfortunately, there is absolutely no teammate data that we can compare between the two AlphaTauri cars. And then from AlphaTauri, we take a look at Alfa Romeo. And once again, it is Giovinazzi that leads Kimi Räikkönen, with Giovinazzi actually making it through to Q2 once again. And it is currently 5-1 in the Q2 head-to-head in the Italians' favour, with the gap in Q1 being 6 tenths in Giovinazzi's favour, which is almost double the season's gap so far in the first 6 races. But again, with both cars not making it through to Q2 or Q3, there is absolutely no real teammate data that we can compare. So from Alfa Romeo, we take a look at Haas. And for once, we could have actually seen a little bit more detail on the Haas progressions graph, but unfortunately Mick Schumacher did bin it in Q1 and then didn't set a time in Q2. But with that being said, the qualifying gap of 6 tenths between the two drivers in Mick Schumacher's favour is just a little bit quicker than the season's average so far. Nikita Mazepin isn't really closing down that gap as much as people would like. Saying that, probably not many people want him to close that gap, but I'm sure there are some people that will. And then finally, for the qualifying edition of the race weekend data analysis for the French Grand Prix, we take a look at Williams. And again, it is George Russell who makes it through to Q2 for the 7th consecutive race. And interestingly, there was just a 2,000th of a second difference between Latifi and Russell. Latifi was P16 and knocked out, and Russell was P15 and he went through. That was as close as Nicholas Latifi has ever been to Q2, or at least to actually out-qualifying George Russell. I do believe he has made it through to Q2 on a number of occasions, however, he has not yet out-qualified George Russell. And there we go, there is all of the data concluded for the qualifying edition of the race weekend data analysis for the French Grand Prix. Please let me know in the comments below what you thought of the qualifying session and also what you thought of today's video. I do apologise for the weekend schedule and the upload schedule being a little bit messed around now due to me working Friday, Saturday and Sunday. But thankfully lots of people have been very, very understanding about what's going on in my life outside of Formula 1, which I do greatly appreciate. So I will endeavour to get this video out late on Saturday / early on Sunday, and then hopefully the rest of the schedule isn't too disrupted. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.